Hello and welcome to the Bible study hour of the greatest church on the planet. Buckle up. These are your announcements. So I got weighed at the gym the other day, and I was about 15 pounds overweight.
Okay.
I told my trainer, don't worry, that full armor of God is heavy.
Weighs you down, doesn't it? That's good. That's real funny. Did you just make that up?
No.
No.
But it popped into my head right as we were about to start shooting. Parents out there, this week, Monday through Friday, 6 to 8 p.m. at The Rock, we are hosting
The Full Armor Sports Camp.
Tell me a little bit about that.
If your child is interested in soccer, football, volleyball, or basketball, or dance,
or drama.
we want you to be there. Sign up today on our website.
Tonight, after evening worship, is the start of our softball league. Tell them about it, Jody.
Game 1, College 1 versus the Hemdingers.
All right, what's game 2?
Game 2 is going to be College 2 versus Brad Holland's class.
The Hollandberries.
The Hollandberries.
They just named their team.
So after worship, if you want some entertainment, come on by our softball field out there. I'm sure you'll get a laugh.
Admission is free.
Come check it out.
Made it in the bucket. Thank you so much for attending the Bible study hour.
If you haven't joined us for worship yet, come 11 o'clock in the worship center, then come back tonight at 6 p.m.
I want to see you tonight. Let's pack the house. We have been walking through Colossians chapter 1, verses 15 through 23. Tonight we are talking about how Jesus was the fullness of God. It will be an important discussion on the identity of Jesus. I want you here for it. And then, of course, afterwards, a little softball.
Let's stand. Every day with Jesus is sweeter than the day before. Every day with Jesus, I love him more and more. Jesus saves and keeps me, and he's what I'm living for. Every day with Jesus is sweeter than the day before. Join me in prayer, please. Father, thank you so much for this day. Lord, we thank you for this class, the opportunity we have to broadcast over the airwaves. We hope will be a blessing to those that are listening. We ask that you look over those that are ill, that they can't be here. We ask you to watch over them, their families. Thank you for all the wonderful things you've given us. These things we ask in your name. Amen. Folks, I want to welcome you to the Radio and TV Bible class, First Baptist Sulphur Springs. We're glad that you're watching on TV, you're listening on the radio. We try to be a blessing to you. We're going to have a wonderful teacher this morning, be Professor Scott. We have a judge, we have a professor, and we have a flunky. So we're glad that you're here with us. We're going to have a special guest singer this morning. His daddy led the music in this room for a number of years. Brother Wendell Sapal, he's gone on to glory. And he's a lot younger than we are today. But Don, we're going to turn it over to you. We're so glad to have Don Sapal as our guest singer.
Thank you, Gary. I come to the garden alone, while the dew is still on the roses, and the voice I hear falling on my ear, the Son of God discloses, and he walks with me, and he talks with me, and he tells me I am his own, and the joy we share as we tarry there, none other has ever known. He speaks, and the sound of his voice is so sweet that the birds hush their singing, and the melody that he gave to me within my heart is ringing, and he walks with me, and he talks with me, and he tells me I am his own, and the joy we share as we tarry there, none other has ever known.
Good morning. I wish I could have been here the previous 2 Sundays to hear our great teachers, James Litzler, Eddie Northcutt. I was doing my annual thing of grading advanced placement exams. On this occasion, we went a little bit longer than normal. there were 750, well, there were 1,500 of us, 750 college professors, 750 high school advanced placement teachers, and we had to grade over 500,000 exams. And this is not counting the multiple choice part that's done by computer. And the fun part for me was I was grading the documents-based questions, which usually run 4 to 5 pages, and they're in the student's handwriting when they're in a hurry. And that made it an interesting challenge. I had never gotten vertigo wearing reading glasses before, but I finally did. I learned that that can happen. But it was a interesting time of getting through that, slugging it out. We were able to work in phases, so you could work between midnight and 6 in the morning as well as the rest of the clock. And we finally wrapped it up Friday night, unless they called me back for a post-reading reading on Monday. That was it this year. So I could not be away from the phone. I could not be away from anything. I had to be close by in case there was some type of a broadcast or whatever. So I literally, the last 2 Sundays, could not leave or step out from where I was. But I know that James and Eddie covered a significant amount of the book of Job. Before I forget, and I always seem to forget this type of thing whenever muscadines are involved or anything else is involved, right here we have a half bushel of Harvester peaches, the first freestones of the season, from the Ham Orchard west of Wills Point, east of Terrell on Highway 80. I picked them up yesterday afternoon. They were picked yesterday morning. So they're about as fresh as you can get. So please help yourself to any of them that you feel inclined to. I'm sure being East Texas with all of our humidity and potential for mold and fungus, they had to be sprayed the whole time they were growing. So be sure you wash them. But anyway, help yourself to any and all that you feel like you can carry there. My eyes are still a little bit blown from the reading experience this year. I wished I could have graded more of them. I was determined to try to get myself to 500, just like when they had me grading short answers 2 years ago. I was determined to get to 2,000, and I only made it to 1,783. The last day I was doing it based on famous dates in history, and I knew that the first day I got through the plague of Marcus Aurelius in 177, and the second day I got through the Visigoths sacking Rome in 410. And I was so determined to try to get to year 2000. And the last day I figured at least I can get to Emancipation Proclamation of 1863. I made it only to the Treaty of Paris of 1783. So, and this time I didn't quite get 500 of the DBQs done, but that was my goal. In any event, I am glad to be back and glad to be reading something normal and something that's actually in print, which happens to be the Word of God. The straightening, the strain, eye-wise and everything, it is so refreshing even to look at number 6 font without reading glasses is a wonderful thing. I have to squint a little, but at least this doesn't hurt. In the last several chapters, and I don't know the extent to which James got to this or Eddie got to this, you have 3 friends acting as comforters. James, would you say they were being very comforting? I would say that with comforters like this, you know, the old saying, with friends like this, who needs enemies? With comforters like this, who needs persecutors? They were determined, bound and determined, to offer a reason. They refused to accept the notion that bad things could happen to good people. The whole realm of that ancient world operated under the premise that prosperity and success were the result of good living, of honest living, of a wholesome way of doing things. You could call it the ancient prosperity gospel. And that as long as you stayed on the right path, the straight path, then everything was going to work out for you beautifully, and you would not be tripped up by terrible circumstances. And yet here we have Job, who is tripped up by a bad set of circumstances as you can imagine. The one time I was able to slip away from the grading, I made my way to Oak Cliff Bible Fellowship, and they had quite a message the other night. Actually, they had quite a message the last 2 nights, and every Wednesday night, Tony Evans is doing what he calls the hot topics. That's topics that are too hot to handle. This last Wednesday night, his topic was same-sex attractions, and what does the Bible have to say about it? And it was a very sharp message, a great rebuke to American culture. And prior to that, it was death, confronting death by the Christian. And it was at that occasion that I was reminded of exactly what he went through in 2020. A lot of us went through some bad things in 2020. Well, 2019, 2020 was the rough time for Dr. Evans. His beloved wife, Lois, passed away very quickly from an aggressive form of cancer. If you looked at her 3 years ago, I'm sure she was close to 70, but she looked all of 35. A very elegant, incredible teacher in her own right. And then I believe his father died, and his brother, and all of that within a 6-month period. And none of it really expected. And I'm thinking, okay, he's sharing a bit of what Job shared. And we've all known people who it just seemed like everything hit them at once, or at least everything came in threes, or something of that nature. But with Job, we really see the original sufferer who lost 10 children, who lost his livelihood, who lost his wealth, who lost all the money in the world, basically, through no fault of his own. Nothing he had done wrong to step outside the parameters of what were supposed to be good behavior. He was a good moral man and a steadfast man, and he stuck to it. His agony was so great that when his friends first saw him, this was after his body had been struck by something that looked for all the world like leprosy, but probably was just a really nasty mixture of hives and boils. It's not the greatest combination in the world. What's that ailment that they're always telling you can get vaccinated for when you're over 50? Shingles. I caught shingles in Africa when I was a much younger man. And I was living on the equator, and there was no air conditioning. And I was sweating continuously with those shingles. There was a doctor there, a British doctor, there in the town that you could go see, and I went to see him, and he walked out and said to me, "Young man, you're a missionary, right?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, I hate to tell you this, but you have herpes." And my jaw hit the floor like some of y'all's just did. Then he said, "Herpes zoster, not herpes simplex. Do you want to know the difference?" And I said, "Please." He said, "Herpes zoster is shingles. It has nothing to do with the other one, not herpes simplex. If this were herpes simplex and you being a missionary, I wouldn't want to know about it." He said, "No, but you have herpes zoster." And he said, "You cannot let anything touch your skin for about the next 96 hours. I can't remember what he gave me in terms of ointment or whatever, but basically I had to wrap a bed sheet around myself as a toga. And I had to wear a toga, which meant I could not really go into the classroom there in that African school wearing a toga. The funny thing was going to the mission meeting 2 nights later wearing a toga in front of all the older missionaries, or as in the Foreign Mission Board, International Mission Board, what everyone calls them is the big missionaries or the BMs. And yeah, we call them that. But I had to just sit there in a toga, sweating and with ointment and whatever the entire time as they were trying not to, actually they were trying too hard not to laugh. But yeah, Job had it worse. Job was a mixture of shingles and boils covering his body. And it was so bad that scraping it with pottery actually felt good by comparison. And that can't have been a good thing. But as he sat there, you know that at every archaeological site in the world where people start, as archaeologists, digging, the most common thing they're going to turn up is the stuff that lasts the longest in the junk heap. And that tends to be broken pottery, broken ceramics, because ceramics have survived through the ages. Ceramics will survive through the millennia. Apparently, he was already out there in that same type of junk heap where people dumped their broken ceramic, and he was scratching away as best he could. And I can't imagine what the type of pain he must have. Well, actually, I kind of can. How many of you were in boot camp or basic training when you came down with even a minor illness or ailment? A bad cold, something like that, David? William, Great Lakes never did anything bad to you?
Not during that period of time.
I was at Quantico, and the sergeants were given the choice as we marched out on bivouac way down the Potomac in the forest in that lovely summer of 1980, which some of you might remember, all the heat, all those days. And they chose to bivouac us. Now, the heat along the Potomac wasn't as intense as Texas. We didn't have any 111-degree days. We had a whole series of 100-degree days, what were called Black Flag days, and the humidity. Because you've lived near there, you know what it's like where the Potomac hits the Chesapeake in midsummer. And it was just swamp-like atmospheres. You're marching through those very beautiful forests otherwise. And the sergeants chose to bivouac us after dark in a field of poison sumac. Poison sumac all across the ground. Whether they did it on purpose or not, it's hard to say. We didn't have actual tents. It was the old thing where you and a partner each have half a tent and there's no bottom to it, and you all just sleep on the ground under those two half shelters, which meant we were rolling in the stuff. By the time we returned to the barracks, everybody was just miserable with that stuff. And it's amazing what people would do to try to alleviate that. Hydrocortisone quickly sold out of the PTX, at the PX, as did calamine lotion, everything. And because they weren't giving us anything for treatment. I guess this was a part of the disciplinary way of doing things, the mind game, whatever. I saw one young man who, he was actually a Vietnam veteran, but had gone to college, come back, and he adopted a very extraordinary measure. As he was ironing his camis, he would suddenly zap himself with the iron anywhere that it was oozing. And I said, won't that leave permanent scars? And he said, not if I do it fast enough. And it worked. And I found myself in the same point of desperation. My solution was to take the edge of my bayonet and scratch where it was oozing and pour raw Clorox on it. And as soon as it dried out, then put on the hydrocortisone. And that gave some relief that way. You might be thinking, isn't the bayonet worse than the itching? And the answer is no. I would have taken any amount of scratching or anything else in preference to that itching. And that's the situation Job was at as well, as he sat in the dust of that rubbish heap. Scratching that stuff away with broken pottery shards, what would be like broken glass to us today, just trying to get some relief out of there, was a miserable sight. And when his friends saw him, they didn't even speak because they knew his grief was beyond words. Words could not help at that point, and they just sat down with him for about 96 hours and nobody said anything. When they finally began to speak, their words weren't much help. And as James and Eddie pointed out, they were determined to find out, what is it in your life, our friend Job, that has brought you to this? What did you do? What have you done? What secret sin do we not even know about? What is it that we're not seeing? And Job defended himself with the truth. He said, I really can't think of anything. I have not. I have not. I cannot think of anything. I have remained steadfast to God. Of course, in answer to that, Job's wife had told him to do what? Just curse God and die. Just go ahead and he continued to say, no, I haven't. I haven't. And this blew their minds. They said, there has to be something. He said, no. Elihu was giving him a long lecture, I believe in chapter, towards the end. And then he stopped rather short. And then Bildad began to speak, and Job cut him off. Basically, these guys were talked out after all these chapters of railing on Job. They were finally talked out, thank goodness. And now Job began his long discourse. Chapter 27, verse 1, Job continued his discourse saying, as God lives, who has deprived me of justice, and the Almighty who has made me bitter, as long as my breath is still in me, and the breath from God remains in my nostrils, my lips will not speak unjustly, and my tongue will not utter deceit. I will never affirm that you are right. I will maintain my integrity until I die. I will cling to my righteousness and never let it go. My conscience will not accuse me as long as I live. Their criticisms of Job had gotten so sharp, and their speculations so vicious, that Job at one point is having to warn them, that's slander. Y'all be careful, because you're getting in to the edge of false witness here, which of course was a terrible sin for them. May my enemy be like the wicked and my opponent like the unjust, for what hope does the godless person have when he is cut off, when God takes away his life? That is something the world does not want to face. That is definitely something that in our media-controlled culture, people don't want to acknowledge. The number of commentators you hear on the radio or on television who parade their atheism and who deride Christians, the one question that I would like to look in their eyes and ask them is, what about that moment when you die? Of course, many will come off with some sarcastic remark at that point as a defensive measure. But the fact is, they don't have hope. Therefore, they live in denial all the time. When I was in Kenya, one of our missionaries was called on to do a funeral for an old Brit. There were a lot of old Brits left while I was in Kenya. Of course, you had the old safari culture and the old White Highlands culture from the early 1900s, the out of Africa people for the Meryl Streep movie. All of that type of culture still existed, and many of these people were in their 90s and 100s by the 1980s. One of them, who was right at 90 years old, got a call that Somali terrorists were attacking some tourists up near one of the lion sites. He jumped into his Jeep, drove full speed, had his .30-30 Winchester lever action at the ready as he drove in straight into 30 Somali terrorists with AK-47s. He was slightly outgunned. They mowed him down, and the two African gentlemen with him. You might know him. His name was George Adamson. And he and his wife, Joy, had made a movie called Born Free about a lioness named Elsa. And Joy had died some years ago. She was murdered by one of the servants that didn't like her. And now, many years later, living out in the brush with the lions, with everything, he tried to rescue some tourists, and he lived as Ernest Hemingway and all his contemporaries had lived. You live hard, you don't turn down any challenge, you go for it, and you don't worry about tomorrow. One has to admire his bravery in that situation, but he died right there. One of his friends passed away of old age at that time, at the age of, I want to say, 104. And one of our missionaries, a young man from Missouri, was called to do the funeral service because this man had no church background, not even C of E. By the way, what do I mean when I say C of E? Church of England. The standard thing that many of them claim to be, but often weren't. And I knew some great C of E missionaries out there, by the way. But anyway, as he was doing the funeral, all these Brits were there who had been born and raised in Kenya. They were all ages from teenagers up to 100. And they were all part of that old East African British culture, which again, dates from the out of Africa era. And these people these are people who drove in the safari rally. These are people who had hunted wild beasts. These are people who had fought Mau Mau terrorists. These were World War II veterans. These were Malaysian insurgency veterans. These were all types of people that were as tough and hard and brown leather as you can imagine. But our missionary said when he looked at them, the look on their faces wasn't their normal toughness and we'll get through this or stiff upper lip. It was absolute shock. Absolute shock. They weren't ready. Not one of them was ready. And now here they being confronted right in their faces. And it was not a pleasant experience for any of them whatsoever. There was no joy that we will see him again. There is no joy that I will see him again. None of that. They held no hope. They were unsaved. And they knew it. And that's how they'd live their lives. And that's exactly what Job is saying here. What hope does the godless person have when he is cut off, when God takes away his life? Will God hear his cry when distress comes on him? Will he delight in the Almighty? Will he call on God at all times? I will teach you about God's power. I will not conceal what the Almighty has planned. All of you have seen this for yourselves. So why do you keep up this empty talk? This is a wicked man's lot from God, the inheritance the ruthless receive from the Almighty. Even if his children increase, they are destined for the sword. His descendants will never have enough food. What does it say later about the righteous? I have never seen the righteous forsaken or his children out begging for bread. Those who survive him will be buried by the plague, yet their widows will not weep for them. Though he piles up silver like dust and heaps up fine clothing like clay, he may heap it up, but the righteous will wear it, and the innocent will divide up his silver. He who dies with the most toys wins. Yeah. Chapter 28. Surely there is a mine for silver and a place where gold is refined. Job now speaks of the earth's riches. Gold, as of closing time in the London and New York markets yesterday, was $1,782 per ounce. And silver was $26.20 per ounce. So if you have a handful of silver, that's a fair amount of money these days. And a handful of gold, yeah, pretty much, whatever form you want to have it in. Palladium was, not palladium, platinum. Platinum was over 1,100 per ounce. Palladium was at 2,700, and rhodium, 19,200. And so those are the precious metals market for those who are interested. But here he is saying, precious metals come for the earth. Iron is taken from the ground. Copper is smelted from ore. A miner puts an end to the darkness. He probes the deepest recesses for ore in the gloomy darkness. It is interesting how he is describing what miners will do to find precious metals, what they will do to find treasure, the lengths to which they will go, the incredible underground maneuvering in which they engage. How many of you, like me, would be just a little bit claustrophobic underground if the wall was only a few inches from you on each side? I would have a little bit of a problem with that. I love Carlsbad. I don't love being jammed in. And yet people will do that to look for material wealth. He cuts a shaft far from human habitation in places unknown to those who walk above ground. He's going beyond spelunkering. He is going deep. He is attempting to find that treasure. Suspended far away from people, the miners swing back and forth. They're talking about devices that they install underground to try to jump from chasm to chasm just to go after mineral wealth. Food may come from the earth, but below the surface of the earth is transformed as by fire. They might have all types of mechanical type mechanisms going on. They're increasingly fascinated by how much the ancient people had in the way of technology. The technology in some things is just absolutely fascinating and shows a brilliance that has startled people. I've already told you about the Ekatherian device that they found buried in a shipwreck off the coast of Greece. It was a primitive computer-like device made of multiple metals from 300 BC. Just stunned the world. They said it was comparable to looking in King Tut's tomb and finding an F-15. It was about that shocking. And what he's being described here, incredible engineering, incredible work, but all for the same purpose, going after the earth's riches. Its rocks are a source of lapis lazuli, containing flecks of gold. What is lapis lazuli? Anyone know what color that is? Bluest blue of blue. It's a blue gemstone with a hardness of about 7.5, the diamond's at 9, and, the diamond's at 10. But lapis in those days came mainly from Afghanistan. It was shipped a long way all through the ancient world. They made use of it for thousands of years because it was the best blue thing they could use. One reason Renaissance paintings were expensive in their day is any blue in a Renaissance painting came from ground up lapis lazuli. And it became an unspoken rule among Renaissance artists that if you're ever going to do the Virgin Mary in a painting, it had to be in lapis lazuli, just to signify, okay, that's the Virgin Mary right there. This lapis lazuli gemstone is comparable in hardness to turquoise, which, by the way, they actually had back then too. Turquoise was not just the preserve of the American Southwest. Now, it's the southwestern states that have produced the most. I think Nevada is the only one that still has a functioning mine. But, of course, New Mexico, Colorado, Utah, Arizona, and they had it in the Sinai. There was turquoise in King Tut's mask that came from the Sinai. And so they had these gemstones back there, and people would do anything to try to get them. Trying to get turquoise out of this Sinai mountain area was an amazing achievement for thousands of years ago. No bird of prey knows that path. No falcon's eye has seen it. In other words, the birds flying overhead had no idea there's all this stuff underground, that people are underground going for these things in ways that just defy the imagination. And why does he use the image not just of flying, but birds have incredible what? Eyesight. A hawk, thousands of feet up, can spot a bunny rabbit hopping. We had a roadrunner that wanted to be part of our family. This roadrunner would come up to me and stand on my feet. He just came running out of the field one day. We hadn't raised him. I don't know who raised him. He just showed up one day, came up and just stood beside me and looked up at me wanting to be fed. I eventually got to where he would, I'd see he was tired, so I would sit down. He would come and sit down behind me with his back to me. That way he only had to worry about things 180 degrees, no coyotes coming to get him or anything. And, but his eyesight's what blew my mind. One day he was about, I want to say 100 yards from me, and I held up a tiny breadcrumb. He stared and he just looked away. So I pulled out a tiny piece of tuna fish, no bigger. He came sprinting. It's amazing what eyesight birds have, and yet birds could not see what these people are doing. The paths are unknown. Proud beasts have never walked on it. No lion has ever prowled over it. The miner uses a flint tool and turns up ore from the root of the mountains. He cuts out channels in the rocks, and his eyes spot every treasure. He dams up the streams from flowing so he may bring to light what is hidden. All these advanced engineering techniques being described thousands of years ago. But that's where their genius went, to secure riches, to secure treasures. But where can wisdom be found? Where can wisdom be found? And where is understanding located? No one can know its value. In other words, you can do all of that and spend all your resources and all your knowledge and all your technology and everything going after every possible riches item that exists, every possible precious metal and gemstone that exists. But it's not wisdom. And that, using all your effort, risking your life, doing everything you can possibly imagine, will not find you wisdom. No one can know its value, since it cannot be found in the land of the living. The ocean depths say, "It's not in me," while the sea declares, "I don't have it." There's some pretty dark, deep waters out there that these people have sailed through, whether in the Red Sea, the Mediterranean, the Indian Ocean. Of course, the Laurentian Trench and that one in the South Pacific, whose name I'm forgetting, that goes 37,000 feet. All of those. No, you won't find wisdom even there. Gold cannot be exchanged for it, and silver cannot be weighed out for its price. Wisdom cannot be valued in the gold of Ophir, which they believe was East Africa at this point, Somalia probably, an incredibly rich source of 24-karat gold. In precious onyx or lapis lazuli, onyx being a gemstone of a mostly black, opaque quality. Gold and glass do not compare with it. The articles of fine gold cannot be exchanged for it. Glass, at the time this was written, was often made into a type of cosmetic jewelry that was as expensive as a gemstone. To get glass just right took a lot of trouble. Coral and quartz are not worth mentioning. Now, the coral they're talking about is red coral. It either comes from the Red Sea, the Mediterranean, or the Adriatic Sea, and was quite a gemstone in its own right back then. The price of wisdom is beyond pearls. Topaz from Cush cannot compare with it. Cush means Ethiopia, but Ethiopia at that time was a little bit further north. It's more like on the Red Sea coast of Sudan today. And right there was an island they called Topaz Island. Later, when the Crusaders arrived, about 1100 AD, they called it St. John's Island. But it's right at the border of Egypt and Sudan today in the Red Sea, and it still contains topaz-bearing crystal of an incredibly translucent green quality, yellow-green quality that was just unbelievably valuable. And yet, it's not wisdom. Topaz from Cush cannot compare with it, and it cannot be valued in pure gold. Where then does wisdom come from, and where is understanding located? By the way, what is the difference between wisdom and knowledge? What the Bible defines as wisdom is knowledge applied, knowledge in application, knowledge done right. Greg, James, did you learn anything in 1L? Not a thing. You were never required to memorize cases. And the professor never called on you ever. Did you look forward to that day? I knew many a 1L professor who was very frank about what he would do. You would be called on, every student's called on twice in the semester, how they perform each time. And William, I'm looking right at you when I'm saying this too, and I can't help but wonder if this was done. But you were at Baylor Law School, right? They would call on them twice in the semester per student. 1/3 of your grade is when you're called on the first time, 1/3 of your grade the second time, and the final third is your final exam.
Here's how I escaped. Mad Dog Dawson was the guy, and I didn't just sort of see it, and I was sitting like close, just as close as I could get to him, so he just was always looking over my head. So.
That was brilliant. In other words, Greg Price is explaining that he survived 1L by hiding in plain sight. He got as close to the professor, seating-wise, as he could, so the professor was too busy staring across the room. That's brilliant, Greg. That's awesome. James, you didn't work it that way? Just duck your head. Knowledge is what they're trying to pour into you at that point. Now, the ability to apply it is when they're calling on you. And knowledge can sometimes be a positive thing. Knowledge can sometimes be a bad thing. But wisdom goes way deeper. Wisdom is the successful and, pardon the expression, judicious application of knowledge. You're walking in wisdom. It's something deeper. It is hidden from the eyes of every living thing and concealed from the birds of the sky. What do we have about us every day that is concealed from our eyes? Air. Anybody ever seen air? Yet it's there. It is hidden from the eyes of every living thing and concealed from the birds of the sky. Abaddon and Death say, we have heard news of it with our ears. It's beyond death and the grave, but has nothing to do with them. But God understands the way to wisdom, and he knows its location, for he looks to the end of the earth and sees everything under the heavens. So where is wisdom? It's found in God. It's found walking with God, walking in God, and not letting ourselves be separated from it. Following God, doing things God's way. Who was it that refused to stop praying, even though the message went out that you must pray only to the emperor, to the Shah? Daniel. Charlotte, you're exactly right. Daniel. In fact, Daniel did what he always did. He didn't pray in secret or in a closet. He prayed as openly as he always had. There was no compromise. And Daniel was a man greatly full of wisdom that God blessed. But God understands the way of wisdom, and he knows its location, for he looks to the ends of the earth, sees everything under the heavens. God fixed the weight of the wind and distributed the waters by measure. When he established a limit for the rain and a path for the lightning, God made the elements. He made everything that's there. There are a lot of arrogant people these days, many of them highly educated with multiple degrees, who believe God is outmoded. Science has outrun him. Our technology is so advanced, there's no need for God anymore. And they could not be more wrong. What they are expressing, of course, is the opposite of wisdom. They have a lot of knowledge, but they're unwilling for it to be applied in a way that's beneficial to them or to anyone else. They refuse to open their eyes and see. He considered wisdom and evaluated it. He established it and examined it. He said to the mankind, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom. And to turn from evil is understanding. Freedom from evil brings us closer to God. Freedom from our narcissist mentality, our selfishness. Freedom from our pet sins. Freedom from the things that Job was being accused of, but of which he was innocent. Freedom from the egos of his friends who started out trying to help and made his situation worse, simply out of their own egocentric mentality. The freedom from that is what God offers us. Cannot tell you the number of young people who say, I don't want to follow God because I want to be free to do things. And it doesn't take long before I look at them and say, how free do you want to be to not do certain things? How free do you want to be to give up vaping? How free do you want to be to give up porn? How free do you want to be to stay away from alcohol? How free do you want to be to not be self-destructive? Anybody can be self-destructive. If the freedom is not to be self-destructive. And what is not self-destructive, that is wisdom. Fear of the Lord, that means looking at God with complete reverential awe. That he is awesome. He's beyond science. He's beyond magic. He's beyond anything that people might try to erect as a false God. He's beyond all of that. And He is love, and He loves us.